Hi, everyone, and welcome back to part one of our Social Contracts podcast brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Arizona. I'm GraceMarie Theesfeld, your host for today's episode. Joining me to explore its meanings and modern applications are our panelists, a variety of students and community members, Anusha, Emra, Ari, and Quin. 250 years ago, the Declaration of Independence did more than announce freedom. It declared a social contract. It said the government exists only with the consent of the governed, that its duty is to secure the rights and representations of the people. Those principles, liberty, justice, and accountability, became the foundation for the Constitution, and just over a decade later, they were written into the Bill of Rights. These include the freedom of speech and press, the right to assemble, freedom of religion, due process, equal protection. The Declaration voiced the grievances, the Bill of Rights set down the remedies. Together, they defined what we the people expect from our government, and today those expectations remain urgent. As we continue to face suppression, exclusion, and unequal representation, the promise of that social contract still calls us forward. The fight for a government that truly represents all of us is not finished. It is the very work of democracy. The grievances in the Declaration of Independence can feel like a long catalog of complaints, but they weren't random. They revealed a pattern of power used to control, silence, and weaken the people. For our discussion today, we'll group the grievances into 6 themes: violations of representative government and self-governance, abuse of judicial power, taxation without representation, economic restrictions and control, military oppression, and acts of tyranny and war. The colonists were demanding a government that served the people, not the other way around.
Grievance 13. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Grievance 16. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. Grievance 19. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Grievance 20. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies.
Guys, without further ado, let's jump into our discussion questions. Number 1, how does this first grievance connect to current discussions about sovereignty, international law, or federal versus state authority?
Yeah, I think we see states resisting federal law and authority all the time. As a federal system, there's always that tension between state laws and federal laws and which one, outweighs the other. And we also see nations questioning international courts and laws. Even the U.S., they haven't ratified the International Criminal Court, and international law isn't as recognized in the United States as other nations. So there's definitely always that tension on which sovereignty overweighs.
Yeah.
And we see that in the first grievance, Grievance 13, where he talks about jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution. The colonists weren't aware of the jurisdiction of British laws as well as the colonies' laws. So there's definitely problems around that and which one outweighs.
I think not only globally, but even just here at home, the authority of the judiciary has been undermined, especially within the past couple of months. I mean, you see judges being repeatedly threatened. A lot of rulings of judges don't get, respected by the federal government. And I think a lot of judges are just, scared. They aren't able to do their job. And so the authority of the judiciary thus gets undermined. And I think that's really important.
I think we're seeing a tension right now where there's been a centralization of power on the federal level, right? Courts have been stacked in one side's favor, even though they're supposed to be nonpartisan. There is gutting of our government. The civil servants that have traditionally been in the government are being just laid off, furloughed, etc., which is then again centralizing power under the president and the executive branch. And so you have that happening at the same time that you have the mobilization of the National Guard, right? That's a tension between state and federal power. You have so many different instances, right? It was kind of interesting during the last election cycle to see now President Trump saying that he was giving the rights back to the states for abortion, right? Like, so even that, where you're striking down something that was a national law through the courts, and then saying, we're going to give this back to the people, right? We're actually giving this back to the states. But then there's this groundswell that's happening, and this tension and this back and forth, because now there's other ways in which abortion is being threatened.
Yeah, 100%. I think it sounds, and it is another form of propaganda, honestly, to introduce and construct messages to say like, oh, well, we're actually giving you your rights back. And the opposite is happening in actuality. So that is one thing that is very concerning to me when we talk about state versus federal authority, is like the federal authority saying, oh, it's a state authority, and it's supposed to be a federal authority. And it's very scary.
There's a deep, I want to say, irony to this all, because you want to give abortion rights back to the states, but then with immigration law, when we see it left up to the states, and states like California that want more inclusive laws, we see these trying to be struck down by the federal government. And so there's just this deep irony here of like what does get left up to the states and what does get left up to the federal government.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It's very scary. And I think this term pretended legislation also really stands out to me in this particular era of politics, because I feel like some of the legislation that's being enacted is almost like a fear tactic to make people more afraid of what's going on. And it makes people more vulnerable to propaganda, I think. And it's very scary.
Yeah, I mean, you have the president here promoting inherently violent behavior towards the legislature and the judiciary, and honestly judges who rule against him, which is not something that should be within his federal authority. It's propaganda. The judiciary should be separate from the executive branch, and it's not.
Yeah, agreed. Our second question, in what ways do restrictions on trade and economic freedom violate the social contract and threaten a people's ability to be self-governing?
Well, money is free speech. If you look at Citizens United versus the FEC, that ruled that basically your freedom of speech translates over to your money within limits to campaign funding.
Sure.
And so I think that the way that one spends their money is free speech. And so being able to spend your money on things in other countries should be up to the individual. And by like levying all these crazy tariffs, it's making it so we can't have free trade within other countries on an individual level.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and not something that I had previously considered.
I would love to jump in on that as well. So at Local First Arizona, we focus on the impact of your dollar, like you were saying, and keeping your money local here in Arizona. And what we're seeing with the tariffs is, one, there's this uncertainty, but also the taxes are being put on to the consumer, right? A lot of locally owned small businesses are having to either stockpile goods because they're uncertain about what they're going to cost down the road and what that's going to do to their bottom line. And then also faced with the decision of, so do I now pass this on to my consumer?
Yeah.
And what will that do? Will that make it so that people don't want to support me because they think the prices are too high?
Yeah.
I don't really have control over that. So you're definitely seeing that it is stifling economic opportunity, and it's very interesting to see how that is impacting locally owned small businesses, while at the same time, I heard today on Wall Street Journal that the six largest banks in the United States are up 19% and made $41 billion in the last quarter.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Yeah, and to that point also, when you drive away business from local businesses, you drive it back to corporations.
Exactly.
And that is also problematic in and of itself, because similar to a lot of these banks, these corporations have the same types of policies that do not put the consumer first, and they don't even put the employee first.
Right.
So it's just very disturbing, because that's a reality for a lot of local businesses as well, because they're enduring costs to operating their businesses, they have employees. Like, that's a problem as well. Like, now it's an impact on these people's lives who made the choice, like, no, I want to work for a small business. Like, I want to put my effort and my time and use my free speech to help support this kind of business.
Right.
And they're being driven away from doing that. Like,
exactly.
It's just, it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like corporate CEOs make 300 times what their employees
it's just ridiculous.
Make, right?
Oh my goodness.
And stocks are up, so, the economy is good, but good for who?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it just perpetuates the exploitation of workers at the bottom of the network, too, because if you have to cut costs, you have to reduce all your other economics costs in other areas, that's going to be on the workers.
Yeah.
You're going to exploit them more. You're going to, force them to work more hours. All of that. It's just really sad. For lower pay as well. It's so sad.
Yeah, I think it really expands the gap in wealth in America, which is already, like, so disproportionate. Like, you can't even fit it on the same chart. It's so off the charts and ridiculous.
Yeah, workers don't have a choice on where they can work because of the market right now.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's always the choice of workers as well.
Yeah, we're facing the greatest wealth disparity of our nation right now. Right.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of monopolies as well, like without regulation, and a lot of our politicians and representatives are themselves businessmen who own these really large corporations. So I think there's a personal interest there as well. But the fact that there are these mergers and monopolies that are occurring, usually behind the doors, like it's not really advertised or on the news as much, but it is hurting small businesses and reducing that competition.
Well, it goes against, we're a capitalist country, right? And so it goes against the premise of capitalism, which is a free market and competing. It's competition. And so the playing field's not level for locally owned businesses to compete. And in that case, the playing field's not level for communities and for individuals to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, right?
Sure. And there's this whole, like, hope around the American dream, right? And we were talking about it in one of my classes, but the majority of us agreed that the American dream is not alive anymore because of these different things happening in our current political situation. And, like you said, Quinn, the whole, like, point of capitalism is a self-made man, right? That you start up a business and you grow continually and you make something of yourself. And unfortunately, I don't think that's a realistic dream that many can have today.
Yeah, the cost of living is just so high that the nuclear family can no longer exist because both I'm putting this in air quotes, the man and the woman of the household have to go out and make money because a single income household is no longer viable.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. My parents come from a developing country, Bangladesh, and the economic situation right there is not great because we don't have a government right now. But I think it's interesting how the perception of America has changed from their eyes, because in the past they always encourage, the students in Bangladesh to come to, places like Arizona, California, New York. And now they're discouraging it.
Yeah.
They say that you're well off in Bangladesh compared to here.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to see.
Yeah, my roommate has been saying the same thing. Yeah. She's from India, and a lot of her social influence was, come to the United States for school, like, do your degree here. And she's doing her master's program, and she's like, I literally cannot afford to live. I don't know how I'm going to continue to go to school. And she's on a visa. She's on a student visa. So now her accessibility to not only education, but also economic wealth and stability, at the bare minimum, stability is compromised because not only because of the big, beautiful bill, but because of everything else. It just makes you want to throw your hands up in the air and just start crying with frustration. And it's just so sad.
And it's this whole cycle as well. You go into debt because of school or owning a home, and then you might end up homeless, and then you might not end up having a job. So it's this whole cycle, and there's a lot of stigma around it as well, where I think the government should really step in because sometimes they are a part of the problem.
Yeah, I think it's transitioned from survival of like the fittest and like who's going to work the hardest to survival of the richest, who has the most generational wealth, who has the most access to resources, who has, you know, X amount of what. It's so frustrating because in theory, the American dream should be survival of the fittest. Like, if you work hard and you try, you will be able to succeed. And that's just not what we're seeing. We have people who are trying and who are trying so hard, and in a lot of ways are trying harder than a lot of these corporate ownerships who work like 60, 70, 80 hours a week trying to provide for their family, and they're still barely scraping by. It's so discouraging. Okay, we will move into our third question. That's all you can do, right? Is be like, okay, this is really bad and it's happening, but all we can do is push forward. Yep. Moving on to question number 3, why was this policy considered so unjust and a violation of the colonists' rights? And when we talk about that policy, we're referring to Grievance 19 for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. This is a good one. This one comes to mind for me with recent ICE interventions and people being detained and held unjustly for pretended offenses that are not actually real. I mean, we have people who are U.S. citizens being taken off the streets. I think I saw on the news that the superintendent of a school in a county in Iowa was detained by ICE and held. So we have U.S. citizens being detained, and it's not even a matter of, oh, we want people who are undocumented to have documentation and proof of citizenship. It's just racism. It's just like, we're going to target people who are black and brown and try to take them off the streets. And it's so disturbing, and it ties directly into this grievance of pretended offenses. And then the element of transporting us beyond seas, maybe not necessarily beyond seas, but they're taking them far from their families. They're separating families. They're separating them from their communities. And it might as well be a sea at that point. You know what I mean? Yeah.
When you were talking, GraceMarie, an example that came up for me, and I think his name was Mahmoud Khalil, who was a pro-Palestine, vocal activist himself from Palestine. And he was a student here. And he exercised his right to free speech, and some people didn't like that. They detained him for, when his wife was giving birth, he missed his firstborn's birth. And it's just troubling how quickly we can criminalize free speech and the right to protest.
I think it's interesting because not only are they taking U.S. citizens off the streets, they're taking Native Americans off the streets and putting them in detention centers in other countries.
Which is just so ironic.
It's
heartbreaking and sad, but it is so deeply ironic, because to think of detaining the people who are native to this land when the person working for ICE is probably an immigrant at some point themselves is just so ridiculous. Like, we have lost the plot. Oh my goodness.
We have lost the plot.
And like I know you mentioned racism as well, and another example was Guantanamo Bay after 9/11, where they detained hundreds of citizens from Middle Eastern descent, and like a majority of them, greater than a majority, had nothing to do with that. So they were racially profiled for their background, endured horrendous troubles and horrors in that prison, and some of them died as well. So it's crazy.
Yeah, and we had something similar happen in Arizona recently. There was I forget what it was, a bill or a referendum or something where ICE agents can target people just based off the fact that they might, quote, look undocumented. What does that even mean? And we know exactly what it means. It's racism. It's people being targeted because they speak Spanish or because they look a certain way. And it's beyond sickening. It's really, really disturbing. And it makes you think about this as well, because it's a repetition of history happening right in front of our eyes, and people don't even realize it.
And like I know SB 1070 is one bill that sticks out. I don't want to name drop, but from a certain Joe Arpaio, when a lot of stuff was going down, and like you said, people were police officers were detaining and stopping individuals on the streets just because they look a certain way, which is not okay. So.
We'll move into our fourth question here. What does the imposition of arbitrary rule in nearby territories suggest about the fragility of the social contract when power becomes centralized and unaccountable?
Well, arbitrary rule makes me think of like how much more centralized our government is right now, and how this arbitrary rule is breaking the social contract because this centralized government isn't keeping up their end of the bargain to protect its citizens and its people. When we're detaining people who are citizens, that isn't keeping up their end of this social contract. So why should the citizens keep up their end?
Yeah, you make a really great point, Ari. It's I'm at a loss for words.
Yeah. Well, I think about the mobilizing of the National Guard into DC, and the justification being crime, but all of the figures show that
Allegedly.
crime was going down, and
Right.
so it's again, it's that arbitrariness and seeing attacks on sanctuary states and similar things where this is coming up, and so it definitely is still relevant today. Yeah.
You can see the same thing happening in my home state of Oregon, in Portland, where they sent, was it the National Guard?
Yeah.
It was a National
Yeah,
Guard,
they sent the National Guard to Portland, where Portland is burning, apparently. I was there last week. It's not. It's not burning. Newsflash. And you can just see the Portlanders having so much fun with it, with their, like, fursuits and inflatable costumes.
Yeah, I saw the dinosaur one.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful, but, like, at what point do we have to respect these officers when it's all just so arbitrary?
Yeah, I kind of want to pick on that unaccountable piece. I think that's something that we see being a key component of everything going on today, because so much of this power is centralized and unaccountable, and the forces that would hold this force accountable have been destroyed.
Right.
And I think that is another big element of why this all feels so scary, because it feels like there's no fallback plan. There's no one to look to say, hey, like, we really need help. Like, there's bad stuff going on. And everyone's like, la, 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 like, okay. And it's just like, hello, like, can we get some help over here? And there's no one to turn to. And I think it brings up that fear. And then eventually that fear, I think, makes people more vulnerable to falling for propaganda and believing the message that's coming from the centralized and unaccountable form of power.
Yeah, I think you see that fear even within our own families. Again, coming from like an immigrant family, a lot of our parents are scared to speak out, scared to talk about these issues that are happening because their entire livelihood depends on the government.
Right.
They're here because of the government. They went through the process of immigration. My parents are citizens now, but they are scared that they're going to lose that by speaking up. Like they basically exchanged their dignity for an American passport is how I'd like to describe it. But it's sad to see because this arbitrary rule just basically erodes the consent of the governed. People like my parents don't even think that they're part of the governed, which is interesting to see. Yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah, when I think about arbitrary or unaccountability, a couple of things that came to mind for me was January 6th and insurrectionists and people that were found guilty and now are being absolved of what they did. And then also our voting, our elections being called into question, the validity of our elections. And I think that those are two deeply disturbing attacks on democracy, because when you weaken people's beliefs that their vote counts, when you show that there are no repercussions for literally attacking the Capitol, all of these things create apathy with voters, and then people stop voting, and then they stop caring. You start thinking, oh, my voice doesn't have
Exactly.
my one vote, one voice doesn't actually exist anymore.
Yeah.
And people disengage, and that's where democracy dies. And so I think we're really at a point in the road where it's like, we need people to continue to speak truth to power, and
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind when you speak about that is the Electoral College and the influence that the Electoral College plays in elections, and just how much of a racist system it is, and that it is still very much alive and active today and determines so much of our future with very little input from us. And it's very disturbing, and it's really unsettling, and I have conversations with people, and I explain to them the history of the Electoral College and why it was instituted in the first place. And people don't even know this. It's like, oh my goodness. And that is not necessarily to blame them, but more so to call attention to the fact, we need to be speaking up about this and explaining why these systems are failing and the historical context behind why they're failing. And we talked again, or briefly, when we discussed ICE and immigration, about the influence of systemic racism in so many of these issues. But I think in the Electoral College, it is more prevalent than ever that this is such a historically racist institution in our government, and it is still so alive and well today. I wish more people knew about the history behind it, and I wish people knew the influence that it had in supporting centralized and unaccountable power.
Yeah, I agree, but on a more optimistic note,
Thank you.
I feel like that's why we have so many civic engagement organizations like the League, like Local First Arizona, and I'm so glad to be a part of this space where we can feel vulnerable and share this space to air out our concerns, but also do something about it. There's calls to action. We can get involved in our local government and take to the streets. And I know that there is some fear and concern about protesting and free speech, but there's always a way to protect yourself. And I mean, it's sad that we have to be cautious and protect ourselves, put on glasses and hats and not make ourselves identifiable. But if that's what we need to do, we'll do it. It's something that we have to do to protect our democracy at the end of the day.
Yeah, don't let the fear paralyze you.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a good way to put it.
Right. If you think the Ben Franklin quote, right? It's what kind of government have you built? A republic, if we can keep it.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is us keeping it.
Yep.
Us having this conversation, us mobilizing other folks to speak up, to vote, to just continue to have conversations with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends. That's democracy. That's democracy in action.
Yeah. Conversations with your peers and with your family are a really great way to spread the message and spread the education. Another one of my favorites is social media engagement. I think that's a really accessible means for a lot of people if they don't feel comfortable protesting. Supporting businesses on social media, reposting, showing people things, especially because so much of what we want to see is being suppressed on purpose. I think promoting things that are helpful, whether it be community gatherings or research or what have you, I think all of those things matter. And even if you influence one person, I think it makes a difference. So that's another kind of call to action that I would mention, and also just being intentional about what you consume on social media, because as much as it is a tool, it's also kind of a demon you have to wrangle with, because there's a lot of mis and disinformation on there too. But
especially with AI.
Yes.
It's
That's why media literacy is so important right now. To know to look at various sources, to not trust one source. And there's a thing online where you can see the political leanings of certain news broadcasts. But just knowing what to look for, and even phishing and if it's fake or not. So
right. Well, I mean, this kind of goes back to this theme that we have right now of consolidating power. You have 6 major media companies,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And so, and you think about it, like Bezos owns the Washington Post,
Yeah.
right? Like there's other very billionaires that are
Yep.
owning the media, which takes away a free and independent media, which again reduces accountability. And yeah, when you think about how, going back to the Citizens United piece, like how much money was pushed into
Yep.
certain campaigns.
Yep.
There it is.
Yeah, it's true, and it's worth mentioning as well. Media literacy is a huge point. I definitely think it's worth mentioning. Well, thank you, panelists, for all of your thoughts today. As we've seen, the grievances listed in the Declaration of Independence weren't just a random list of complaints. They reflected deeper concerns about representation, justice, immigration, and the abuse of power. Thank you for joining us for episode 7 of our Social Contracts podcast, Breaking Away from Retaliation and Interference with Foreign Affairs, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Arizona. We hope today's discussion gave you new insights into the Declaration and the way its principles still echo today in our civic life.
Be sure to tune into our next episode as we'll continue to explore the 27 grievances, focusing on what they teach us about our social contract and how we can view them through a modern lens.